Shashank, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Sure. I'm Shashank Nigam. I'm the CEO of Simpliflying, possibly the world's most experienced airline marketing firm. We've worked with about 90 airlines and airports globally, specifically on marketing. And we've become really well known for our work in digital and social media and everything that the new age impacts in an airline from a commercial perspective. So everything from social care to crisis communications to launching new aircraft and new products and new routes. We've done it all from the big guys like Emirates and Lufthansa and Singapore Airlines to really small airlines that very few people might have heard of, like Pluna in Uruguay or Estonian Air and Air Baltic. So it's been a fun ride.
And what I love about, well, first of all, and you also have this brilliant book that is called Soar: How the World's Best Airline Brands Delight Customers and Inspire Employees. But it's not just for airlines, and that's so, I think, important for organizations to realize. And when we first met, we have a similar, I suppose, passion and dedication towards our books, that, the effort and the strategy and the love that went into it, that really resonated with me, just because I don't know that I've ever met another author who looks at their book similarly and through the lens that I see mine. Right. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah,
that.
I think one of the things that happened for both of us is that we are practitioners first and authors and speakers second. I know a lot of people who are speakers first and then they release a book.
Yes.
Just so it helps the speaking or consulting.
Yep.
I still do much more consulting and direct work with airlines than the speaking or even the book, which has been out for 1.5 years. And I think one of the most surprising things to me about the book, about Soar, has been how useful it has been to industries outside aviation, because everyone's saying to me, you know what, these are airlines that we can learn from telcos to car companies to insurance agents, because they are perfectly competitive industries as well.
Yep.
So,
and if an airline can get it right, then, and that's a more challenging industry to get right.
And even when things go wrong, there's always a limelight on an airline, and usually things are really blown up when the airline gets it wrong. So if an airline can come through those hard times, there are lessons for everyone as well. And that was the idea behind the book.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too about just both of our kind of synergies on our book is you created something, you were dedicated to the experience that you were creating for readers, which really resonated with me and shines right through.
Yeah. And that's been a hard thing. I think we both are we both are sticklers for detail.
Yes. That's putting it nicely.
Yeah, that comes through from the titles to the fonts to everything else we did in the book. So I was being very honest with you when I met you, and I said the book has been one of the most intense things I've ever done in my life. 18 months dedicated to the book, and I'm so glad that it's bearing fruit now.
Yeah. It's awesome. So tell us, I want to talk about your experience with airlines and how that translates into, through your lens, brand invincibility, and what other organizations. So listening into this are everything from Fortune 100 companies to government agencies to practitioners. So I want to take the incredible lessons and experience that you have experienced through your work and really translate that for listeners to build, sustained trust through the lens that you have experienced.
Right. I think it's a very important question. While writing the book and in my past 10 years of work, I've realized 2 or 3 things which I hold to be the essence of a good airline brand. And I'll get to the word invincible in a minute. A good airline brand is one that not only delights customers. In fact, here's a secret story that not many people know. When I was writing the book, the subtitle was called How Great Airline Brands Delight Customers, full stop. As I was halfway through the book, I realized that, hey, that's incomplete, because no airline can actually delight customers unless they inspire employees. And there are 2 sides to the coin. of building a great brand. Most think it's about marketing. No, it's about delivery. And who delivers your brand is the employees. And that was my realization that great airline brands delight customers and inspire employees. And that's what Soar became.
I love that. It goes to the cultural factor, which is so essential.
Exactly. And airlines are usually few of the organizations which have, 50 to 60 touch points just on the day of travel, where you can impress the customer, and every touch point is an opportunity to delight or fail at that touch point, or you just be the same and hence not be remarkable. Most companies or industries don't have to deal with that, but you can learn lessons. For example, you mentioned government agencies. The Singapore government has actually learned from Singapore Airlines. If inside the Singapore Airlines flight, if you're flying and you ask the flight attendant something, she will never say no. She will always say, let me see what I can do about it. Or if it's outside of her control, let's say I ask for a mango on board, on a flight over the Arctic, and it's obviously outside her control and there's obviously no mango on board, she won't say, no, there's no mango, or no, you're flying economy class, just shut up. She will instead say, let me check with my supervisor what I can do. She'll go back and she might bring me a platter of tropical fruit as a substitute, or even offer mango on arrival. Singapore has mangoes, so mango on arrival or something like that in the lounge. And they'll communicate through Wi-Fi or through the ACARS system. The pilots probably listening know what ACARS is. But the Singapore government learned this, and if you call any Singapore government agency, and let's say I call the health department to say, hey, what about my work permit? It's expiring soon. They cannot say, sorry, this is the health department, and put the phone down. Instead, they will say, you know what? You've got the wrong department, but let me see what I can do to help you. Actually, I found the number for the work permit department, and I'm going to transfer you to them. They never say no. And there are lessons you can learn. Now, this is going back to how great brands inspire employees to deliver a great customer experience, and how government agencies, for example, as far removed as they are from the airline world, can learn from it.
Yes.
The second part to your original question was, how do airlines build an invincible brand? And I'd like to be a little controversial here and make a statement that no airline brand can be invincible.
Agreed.
And that's the unfortunate reality of the airline business. Even the most solid brands have faced hard times, have faced criticism, have had a huge dip in a stock price in a day because of some rumor or the other. So invincibility is aspirational in the airline business, which is what makes it so exciting for me personally to be in it, because there's always something happening, you're always improving. So yes, invincibility is something to aspire towards, like that sports car that you always dreamed of when you were a kid. And one day you might get to it.
I love that you're saying that, and I don't see it as controversial. So the invincibility factor for me is not that something negative will never happen, or your stock price will never dip, or you'll never suffer, negative impact, material impact as a result of an event. Really, the invincibility factor is understanding that risk exists, and understanding and being very alert and aware of the impact of risk and the potential impact of risk, but striving to create a brand, create a culture within an organization that no matter what happens, you're putting people first, and your team is inspired and trained and empowered to do that, to put people first and to work towards mitigating the risk of lost trust and credibility. So that's where that invincibility factor comes in, because we can't prevent every risk, but we can prepare for the unpreventable and prevent the preventable, and empower our teams and instill a culture where it's always about the relationships. And even since the very first start of my career in this industry, the one thing, I was having this discussion with my agent recently where she was like, what's one thing? Like, if you could just give one thing. And it goes back to the very first one thing that I would ever say. And this is like almost a decade ago, and it still applies. It was, if you don't know what to do, if you're faced with a hardship, you don't know what to do, if you always focus on proactively strengthening, building, or mitigating the risk of losing trust with those who matter most to your business, then you're going to make you're going to take your organization in the right direction always. So
Right.
that's where that invincibility factor comes in. And that's why our synergy is so just, I love it. And there was something on that note, there was something that I had a note here that Southwest says, that is in your book, that is the business of business is people, people, and people. And I love that.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. It is one of the strongest characteristics of Southwest. When I was choosing airlines in the book, I wanted them to be as different from each other as possible. So you've got on one hand Southwest, which is all about individuality and knowing the person's name and showcasing individuality, and it's one of the most profitable, consistently profitable airlines in the world. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Singapore Airlines, let's say, which is also one of the most consistently profitable airlines in the world, but you will always have a Singapore girl who's delivering the service. It's not about individuality, it's about delivering a coherent brand experience. And I love the way you explain invincibility. It's about knowing the risks and then being able to tackle them rather than avoiding the risks or expecting there to be no risks.
Yes.
In fact, in my book, I introduce a model called the 6X model, in which one of the factors, there are 6 factors that basically the airline brand needs to think about or be careful about or look to master. One of them is called brand externalities with a big X. Brand externalities is something that is very unique to the aviation industry. And that's because 90% of the risk is actually from outside the business. Oh, there's a snowstorm outside and your flight's delayed. The airline sucks.
Yep.
Compare this to, let's say, something like Starbucks. You're sitting in Starbucks, it's snowing outside, your coffee actually feels a little nicer and Starbucks feels cozier, right?
Yes.
And the snowstorm outside is not Starbucks' fault. But you're at the airport and you see one plane taking off and yours is not. Come on, my airline is not taking off, there's something wrong with the airline, right? So 90% of the stuff from weather to earthquakes to a competitor going bust to an airport baggage system going down, it's not actually the airline's fault. But the brand cannot say it's not my fault and just, brush your hands off. You have to embrace the customer at that point and say, you know what? You are a customer. You're on journey. We'll take care of you. We got this. We'll put you in a hotel. We'll give you some food. You'll be taken care of. Don't worry. Starbucks doesn't know to do that.
No.
Right? And that's the most critical aspect of what makes good airlines stand out, and great airlines. That's how they differ.
One of the most essential things for airlines in particular, and any type of industry or organization that is similar in that sense, where it's outside factors and massive amounts of people on a regular basis, is understanding that emotional impact and what it has. So if you look and our mutual friend Dave Carroll of United Breaks Guitars, which is so funny to say, of United Breaks Guitars, now like a decade later, but he uses this term, no one person should be seen as statistically insignificant. And understanding, which I believe wholeheartedly in, I think that that's another cultural mindset that should be instilled in every organization. And if we look at the understanding the emotion of those people, we have another shared friend, Sean Roth, who's a captain of United Airlines again, and he sees it the same way. He sees, like, if one plane he's a captain of this airline, and if one plane is delayed or canceled, which now there's FAA regulation around not canceling flights due to number of people, right? But back in the day when that didn't exist, he would look at it and say, there may be only 10 people on the plane, so now we have to cancel the flight, but these 10 people either are going to see family or are, if it was me, I'd have back-to-back meetings, or I'd be due on stage to a client that, just hired me to deliver something. So looking at and understanding, my whole point in saying this is understanding from the customer or the client's perspective what that emotion is, and having empathy towards that, so that you can empower your team, train them to have that empathy or to see it through that lens, and then empower them to do what's right to create that experience of it can either be neutral, to your point, it can either be positive or it can be a lingering sentiment of negativity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. In the airline industry, all of this is just amplified just because there are so many customers.
Yes.
I mean, how much can you zoom in on one customer? Yet, the airlines that do it well focus on that one customer and make the day for that one customer. There are ample case studies I share in my book. One of them comes to mind is Turkish Airlines. Focuses on food as its selling point. It's like a wedding. You may not remember anything, but you'll always remember the food that was at the wedding. They say,
this is true.
Yeah, they say in Turkey, if you're flying just via Turkey and not getting in the inside, what can we bring from the country that, that really will leave an impact and a memory and a great memory? And they said, you know what, our food is really unique. Let's bring out the shawarmas, let's bring out the kebabs, let's bring out all the baklavas and the dishes and bring them on board. And they have everything from cutlery, which is locally designed, to the food that they're serving, from the soups, to the pomegranate juice, to a fake candle that flickers when the cabin is deemed a candlelight dinner. And the meal service is an art. Not only that, they have a fully uniformed chef, a professional chef, trained by Austria's Doe & Co., serving every customer, every business class passenger on board. And it's just quite amazing when I took off from Montreal on my flight to Istanbul. We took off around 11 p.m. and around 2 a.m. it was dessert time, and this guy brings the molten lava chocolate cake and pours sugar powder on top of my chocolate at 2 a.m. and I'm like, okay, something really special.
Yeah, you put that sticker saying "Wake me up for food."
Yeah, exactly. Like the meal service, I don't mind waiting 4 hours for it, and they focus on it so much that they have actually taken out duty-free shopping so that people are not distracted from the meal service.
Wow.
Now, when you zoom into the individual, they're actually looking at taste buds and ensuring that one of the 5 senses is heightened. If it's not the smell, not the sight of the plane, which is all normal, and anyone can duplicate it. But very few airlines put a chef on board who pours, sugar powder on your souffle late at night. So, and it leaves an impression.
Yes.
And then they follow up with these people, and there are blogs, there are foodie blogs on Turkish Airlines food. There are food bloggers and Instagrammers who go to Turkish Airlines lounge to try the pide, which is the traditional Turkish omelet, a flatbread omelet. And it's just completely different. You would not think, put an airline in that box, but there it is. And that's the thing. When you focus on the individual, not just when things are going right, actually, you're a crisis expert. You know how things are when things go wrong. Mm-hmm. When things go wrong, you have to even go further and deeper into the individual and speak to the individual. One of the chapters I have in my book is erasure. And it's mercurial, yet very, a co-founder who's full of empathy, Tony Fernandez. And they have gone through tough times. In fact, they had a very public plane crash in December of 2014, 2 days before Christmas. And in those 5 to 7 days after the crash, Tony Fernandez single-handedly rewrote the crisis communications textbook for airlines. There was the period before Tony, and then there was the period after Tony led this crisis. Just like there was a period before Dave Carroll's United Breaks guitars, and after. Yeah. And specifically in Tony Fernandez's case, he was not following any guidebooks. He was tweeting publicly to his employees, because guess what? While family members lost one person, employees lost 6 people they knew, 6 best friends who were on board that flight. So he's tweeting to employees, I as the CEO, I'm here with you. I'm going to Indonesia right now. And he was there, the first person at the crash site, along with the minister. He was there himself, even though many people from the press said, hold on, let the local team handle it. Hold on, prepare your statement first. Hold on, He says, no, this is me, this is my airline, and this is the most humanly impactful thing that has ever happened to me in my life. And I got to be there. And he was there, hearing, shouting relatives, why aren't they getting information from the airline, which was the case, and why from the news media. He was there hugging passengers. He was there WhatsApping and texting with relatives, just asking who they are, where do they live, how can he help. He was there attending funerals with some of the relatives. It was not easy. It was Christmas and New Year. He could have been with his daughter celebrating.
Yeah.
But he was there completely emotionally invested with individuals who were impacted, which goes back to your point, about individuals. It's about a human connection. And fine, he might be the CEO, but he's willing to come down to this level.
And it's not down. It's his responsibility as leadership. That's the difference, I think. And you're 100% right that a great brand is built on the experience it provides and the connection it strives to achieve. And in crisis, that's why it's so essential for crisis readiness to be cultural. And it's like the thing that I continuously say and believe wholeheartedly in. You'll never hear me use language of crisis management plan, because a plan is siloed, it's stagnant, it sits on a shelf. A culture does the right thing intrinsically because it lives and breathes that culture and that mindset every single day. And you're right, it needs to be amplified in a crisis. And business is about people, crisis management is about people. And so that's a beautiful example. And I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, I want listeners to take away what the result of that was. And just to your point was he single-handedly rewrote the textbook or set the bar for what crisis management needs to be today and why. And that it wasn't photo ops. It wasn't rolling up the sleeves to be seen as. It was heartfelt and sincere, and he missed Christmas with his family to do what was right for the people that were devastated as a result of a risk that materialized for his organization.
You're absolutely right. And just to give you some context of, you said a crisis manual that's sitting on a shelf. That's exactly how things are in aviation. I'm part of the industry.
It's the status quo currently. I'm working to change that, but it is currently, historically what is done.
And I'll give you an example of what that leads to. 3 years ago, there was a Thai Airways aircraft that did not crash. It just overshot the runway, so the landing gear collapsed, and then people had to come out of the slides. Not too bad. Everyone was safe. Everyone got on the next flight. Everyone made it home within a day. Okay. But because the wheel had collapsed, the plane was next on the runway. Okay. So they were using the parallel runway for landing. So people landing could see that plane, something's wrong, and people were taking pictures, right? Everyone's taking out the phone these days. So somebody at Thai Airways pulled out the crisis manual, which was written by the airline governing body, IATA, many years ago. I'm not sure where they got that manual from. They pulled it out and said, okay, in case of a crisis, firstly, to prevent damage to the brand, cover up your logo. Okay.
Well, okay. There's a prioritized task.
We might laugh, and I'll share this link to the blog post I did on this. Cover up your logo. Okay. So they went overnight. It crashed in the morning. Overnight, they painted the tail black. Only the tail. Okay. So now the tail has just black paint on it, but the rest of the plane is visible. the rest of the livery is actually visible. And I actually had the Thai Airways plane right next to me. I'm sitting in my den right now.
Yeah.
So they painted this part black. And they left all of this untouched. They painted this black as well. But this, if you're landing in Bangkok, it's Thai Airways hub. It's not Hawaiian Airlines that's sitting there. It's Thai Airways.
Yeah.
Guess what? If you see a weird tail with a black logo on it, are you more likely to take a picture or less likely?
And what does that insinuate?
Here's the result of it, okay? If you search Google, Thai Airways crash, you get 4,000 results of this blackened image and about 100 results of the actual plane without the blackened image with the press release and stuff. So the brand completely lost control of the conversation, and they desperately tried to somehow get it back, but it was too late. Everyone was having fun at the expense of the airline. Like, what are they doing? And then they issued a press statement. We were following our manuals, and this is how we are supposed to do things. Of course, since then, we've spoken. And
You've
they've
helped them.
changed their processes, and now they will do things differently if it was to unfortunately happen again. But that's the reality for most airlines, and that's how far, when I say Tony Fernandez rewrote the crisis book, that's how far things have come. And these are neighboring countries, Malaysia and Thailand. So it's not like in two different parts of the world, culturally the same as well. So
Yeah. And
that's how far they've come.
you know what flabbergasts me is the lack of people look at surface value. So where did that stem from? That stemmed from, how do we protect the brand? It didn't stem from, you have to go deeper than that. And even if somebody were to bring that to the table and say, let's paint over our logo, how do you protect the brand? Let's paint over our logo. That is so shallow. It's so surface level. And in order to be strategic in terms of crisis readiness, you need to go to the root of everything, the root of the incident, what went wrong, the root of why. Like, why are you using certain channels to communicate? Why are you taking the actions that you're taking? Why you need to challenge everything and really dissect. So if somebody were to bring that to the table, let's cover our logo, protect the brand, cover the logo, go deeper and say why. What does that insinuate? What's the risk? How can that be misconstrued? How can that be misperceived? What's the emotional attachment to that? What are some other, like, there's so many questions that don't get raised, and it leads to, for example, as kind of a parallel is, and one maybe that more people can relate to, is just the term social media crisis. That term in and of itself drives me crazy, because if you label anything as a social media crisis, you are entirely missing the mark of going deeper to understand, because social media is never the crisis. Social media is a means of communication. It's a platform, and it is a reality of any viral issue and every crisis in this day and age, because it is cultural. It is a part of our society. It is the way we communicate. So labeling it as a social media crisis, you have a culture right there that speaks to me that says you don't go deeper, you miss the entire mark of what is more essential to understand and strive to achieve.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. There is no such thing as a social media crisis.
There's no such thing as a social media crisis.
There's a crisis that now spreads faster and
yes,
in different ways than previously because of social media.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you a question. Actually, I'm very curious, because lots of airlines, not airlines, in aviation, there are lots of B2B companies as well, like manufacturers, engine manufacturers, wheel manufacturers. There's a ton of suppliers.
Yep.
While airlines are customer facing, these manufacturers are actually not. They can hide behind the airline, right? And they say, we're working with the airline to solve this. Traditionally, in crisis comms, there was always the adage of, let's keep quiet, wait till a funny cat video comes up, and things will die down. The news cycle will die down. We'll just stay quiet. I have actually seen very large billion-dollar aviation companies staying quiet for weeks, not issuing a single statement, letting the airline do the grunt work, including the airline CEO going on record saying the engine guy did it, and they're quiet. Tell me, is staying quiet an option, or a viable option, at least for airlines in today's day and age?
So let's look at the why. Let's do exactly what I just said and dive deeper into that. What does staying quiet do in terms of, if the focus is always on retaining, building, strengthening, mitigating the risk of losing credibility and trust with those who matter most to your business, what does staying quiet communicate? What is the emotional connection that you either miss the mark on or give, right, induce as a result of staying quiet? What are the expectations of those who matter most to your business? Depending on the situation, those stakeholders may vary, but what is their expectation? And is staying quiet ever a part of that expectation? So if we answer those questions, and those questions should be answered on in looking at the different high-risk scenarios that pertain to your organization. So the different high impact, most likely types of incidents to occur, right? Negative incidents to occur, and looking at every single one of those stakeholders. So, and you can answer those questions. I'd prefer people to answer those questions for themselves and get to that conclusion, and then from there develop the strategy.
Right.
Than me saying, no, staying quiet is not something you should do today. And it isn't, because it doesn't serve anybody or anything. Now, how there are exceptions to the rule, right? Which is why it's important to look at each one. Crisis management is not a generic playbook. Crisis management is nuanced and specific to the circumstances. So it's even more important to understand, for example, difference between issue and crisis and that threshold. So if you're faced with an issue, potentially staying quiet is better than being proactive in your communication. However, internally, understand where that threshold is and where it changes. And you can be reactive in the sense of maybe not proactively communicating when it hasn't passed that threshold, but you best be ready to be proactive once it starts, which means you are being proactive internally. You're just setting that mark on understanding the risk and reality of the scope and impact of the situation, and saying, if this happens, if these things happen, if we see this, if this gets triggered, if this gets revealed in the investigation and this gets confirmed, if whatever those benchmarks are, then you have that strategy of response, which is not being quiet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think the essence is always ask why. Why are you doing something?
Why is my favorite word.
Yeah.
It gives you so much.
It doesn't get asked often enough, especially in large organizations. Very often they might just look at, oh, you know what, BP messed it up, so we won't do what they did, which is talk to press. Oops, hence we'll stay quiet. And I'm not kidding you. That's often the justification. And C-level executives are scared. Like, I don't want what happened to BP happening to my brand. So yeah, sure, PR guy, I'll stay quiet. I'll take your recommendation.
Yeah.
So, or it might be the other way around. Coming the other way around.
Absolutely.
Very few people ask why.
Agreed. No, and it gives you everything. Understanding root cause and scope and impact and risk and thresholds and what all of that means. It gives you everything. It gives you the data you need to make the right decisions when things are difficult, when times are difficult.
Yeah. I think another thing that you mentioned earlier is just crisis plans being adaptive.
Yes.
Because situations and times are always changing. And I've got a little example. We were working with an airline in Latin America, and they had a WhatsApp group, which is popular there. They had a WhatsApp group of lots of people from different departments and countries informing each other when things went wrong. So a hurricane in Cancun would also send a notification to the country manager for Colombia, and he would just ignore it. Initially, there was a barrage, so half the people started ignoring the crisis thing, except for one or two people who had to respond on social media, believe it or not, because they had to post updates. But then something happened. The CEO joined the group. And now he started looking at who's responding and who's not. And suddenly people are paying attention. But then something interesting happened. Because the CEO was there, nobody wanted to make any real off-the-cuff marks. They were very considered in their planning. And when we worked with them, we realized that the group is just not working. You're either too quiet or you're too proper with the things you're saying because CEO is there. And we ended up starting a new group without the CEO.
It's funny. I have clients that their crisis management team is not, their tactical crisis management team for both action and communications is not really comprised of the senior leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, as counterintuitive as that may sound, you need buy-in and approval and guidance and all of that. Like, they're part of the decision making, but in terms of sitting in that room, they've selected VPs versus the C-suite for precisely that reason. So that, and it's interesting. And it goes to the whole point of understanding the nuances, because they're cultural and they're situation specific and they're stakeholder specific. And there's so many dynamics that need to be thought through to put your organization in the best possible position to be crisis ready and to have that invincibility factor. Yeah.
I think you put it quite well on how this should work, ideally.
Yes. And it's achievable. And that's the whole thing, is that it's not as cumbersome as it probably seems. And there is no reason, no excuse for not being crisis ready in this day and age. That is how I feel. And that's why I work so hard at doing this.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. At least the airlines we have worked with, and that's been a lot across the world, we've seen that airlines that deal with crisis well actually grow as a brand. Because when something goes wrong, the world's eyes are on you. And if you do that well, and if you handle that well on an individual level, truly speaking to your customers and speaking with your employees, it shows. It truly shows. And that's when the brand can shine. And that's, I guess, is their journey towards invincibility.
Yes. Yes. And I think that that is a beautiful note to leave this wonderful conversation on. Thank you so much, Shashank. Where can people find and follow your brilliant work and buy a copy of this amazing book that every organization, every leader should read?
Thank you very much, Melissa. You can get a copy of Soar on Amazon, of course, and on simplysoar.com, simply with an I, simplysoar.com. You can, of course, find my work on simpliflying.com, simply again with an I. And I actually do a daily live show from this shrine of mine on aviation. So folks who are interested in aviation and marketing and brands and learning from airlines, feel free to tune in.
Awesome. And there will be links to everything that you just said below this podcast, no matter where people are listening to it from. Shashank, thank you so much for sharing your brilliance with us.
Thank you, Melissa. It was a wonderful opportunity. Thanks.